is over tonight. And as we told you first during the afternoon, Benito Castillo, the third suspect in the case, is under arrest, captured in Puerto Rico. Kathy Wolf is live for us right now at police headquarters with details on the arrest. Kathy, what is the mood?
Well, Ernie, I was just inside police headquarters, and I can tell you there's a definite feeling of accomplishment here and a feeling of relief. Authorities have done what they set out to do a week and a half ago. The tragic death of Officer Christopher Hoban set in motion an intense search. It's a search that took them to Puerto Rico, where they found the man they believe to be his killer. They arrested him in a shopping mall in a suburb of San Juan. It's a suburb called Santurce. And at a news conference this afternoon, authorities gave the detail of that capture.
The break in the case came last night when New York City detectives developed information that Castillo was hiding out in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico. The FBI was contacted, and they developed information that led to Castillo's arrest today.
That welcome announcement follows a massive 9-day manhunt. Hundreds of New York City police officers and 70 FBI agents searched for the killer of Christopher Hoban. Hoban was a 4-year veteran of the force. The 26-year-old was shot on October 18th during a buy and bust operation in Upper Manhattan. He managed to shoot and kill one of 3 suspects. Another was apprehended that night, but 24-year-old Benito Castillo got away. Police say when 3 FBI agents spotted him this afternoon, he ran and put up a short struggle. He's expected to be arraigned this afternoon.
If Castillo waives extradition, he could be back in New York City as early as tomorrow. If he fights extradition, it could take 10 days to 2 weeks before he's back here.
One question everybody wants answered is how in the world did Castillo make it out of this area? There was a big police dragnet set up, and how could he possibly have made it across state lines and all the way to Puerto Rico? The only thing police would tell us today is they believe he made it out of the state by train and then somehow got a plane to Puerto Rico. They say they were just hours behind him the whole way. It's also important to note that the tip that led to his arrest came through on the Cop Shot hotline. So now someone may be eligible for a $10,000 reward. Of course, that person's identity will never be revealed. We're live at One Police Plaza. I'm Kathy Wolf, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Okay, Kathy, and for the grieving parents of slain Officer Hoban, today's arrest can only mean some relief. Mr. and Mrs. Hoban have been gracious enough to join us live tonight from their home in Brooklyn. Sarah Wallace is with them right now, and we're going to go to that interview momentarily, as I understand. Do we have a little problem with our connection? If we do, then what we'll do is we'll move ahead to our... We do have it? Okay, let's go live now to Sarah Wallace at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Hoban. Sarah?
Ernie, I'm sitting in the living room with Mr. and Mrs. Hoban. One of the first people to call the Hobans and tell them the news was Michael German, who was Chris's undercover partner that night. I'm sitting here with both the Hobans, obviously, as we've said, and I know a great feeling of relief for you both. Tell me about it.
Not only a feeling of relief, we are elated to hear that he was caught. We didn't doubt that all the law enforcement agencies in this city and country had a concerted effort to catch him, and we knew that he would be caught. We didn't know how long, but we felt definitely he would be caught.
You mentioned, Mrs. Hoban, earlier that you don't feel a sense of vengeance, that you just want justice.
That's all we want. We never felt... We don't want anyone to feel vengeance, but we do want justice, and we know that God will give us justice.
Ernie, you mentioned that you have a question that you wanted to ask the Hobans. Go ahead.
Yes, Mrs. Hoban, Mr. Hoban, at a time of great personal loss, we are all touched by your courage and also your deep concern about the drug problem that we all face. We know that. Are you somewhat encouraged by what's going on now, the efforts to pass some tough new laws and efforts to go after the bad guys?
Oh, definitely, we are encouraged. We hope that this double funeral, the Buzak and Hoban funeral, had made this kind of impression. We wanted to make that statement, and we do want a death penalty passed for anyone who kills any law enforcement agent. And my husband feels the same way. Would you like to say?
Yes. I wish that the legislature would submit another bill to Governor Cuomo to have the death penalty instituted in New York State. And I feel that if it's done at this time, that not in the interest of revenge, but justice, because I can see where these people are going to be immune to any kind of capital punishment. They've just killed anybody and they can get away with it.
You don't want your son to die in vain?
Oh,
Yes,
definitely. We feel that if something is done about this, he will not have died in vain.
So you feel also, I know, that he has been some kind of a catalyst to move on with this fight against the drug situation.
That's exactly what we feel, that his death was the catalyst for this.
And we have to show you here, these on the table are just some of the thousands, I'm telling you, of letters and cards which have poured into the Hoban home. This is a shopping bag. There are 18 more shopping bags like this behind the table. Tell me more just from people you've never met.
Oh, New York, from New Yorkers that we've never met. Someone my husband went to school with 50 years ago, graduated, wrote us. The outpouring of love has been unbelievable. The mailman, I don't know what he does when he comes up this block, but we have heard from people we do not know, but who feel our sorrow, and we're grateful.
It's not going to bring him back, but it helps ease the pain a little bit.
It certainly does console us.
Mr. Hoban?
Yes, and it is a great deal of relief that that we do get these kind of love letters and purgatorians, mass cards, and so forth. But it really, I still have to go back to the weak state law, and even if it's made to just have capital punishment for killing a police officer, that would be a step in the right direction. Because if you have no respect for authority, then how safe are we if they know they're just going to get off on a technicality or with the life sentence with the possibility of escape?
Well, we thank you for sharing this time with us, and also it's interesting to mention that both the Hoban's younger sons, Martin, who is 22, and Thomas, who is 20 years old, both plan on becoming police officers. Reporting live from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn at the Hoban home, Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
All right, Sarah, and to repeat, Bienvenido Castillo, he is the man accused of killing police officer Christopher Hoban. He is in custody right now in Puerto Rico. We are expecting some videotape of that arrest. We will bring it to you as soon as we receive it. Ross.
Ernie, as you know, we have another breaking story in our area tonight. A tense hostage standoff at the Northern State Prison in Newark. 2 convicted killers took 2 women hostage today, but after 8
with weather and the Eyewitness News team.
Good evening. We have several stories tonight. The most wanted man in New York City is under arrest. Prisoners took 2 women hostage at a jail in Newark, New Jersey, and they kept prison guards at bay for a good part of the day. A state investigation says mismanagement contributed to 12 deaths at Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx. But first, the police say Bienvenido Castillo, who helped to put this community under siege. Castillo has been arrested in Puerto Rico. The police say he is the man who shot and killed Officer Christopher Hoban on Tuesday night last week. That was the night, you'll recall, that both Hoban and Officer Mike Buzek became casualties in the war on drugs. Kathy Wolf was with the police brass when they learned of the arrest this afternoon, and now Kathy is live at police headquarters to bring us up to date on that story. Kathy?
Bill, we're at police headquarters right now because this is where a news conference was held this afternoon just a short time ago. But this afternoon we were at the 24th precinct where the main detectives based in this case are based, and we were with them when they got the call about Castillo, and I can tell you the air was just charged with this sense of excitement and accomplishment. You can imagine how charged up they are after a week and a half of an intense search, an emotional search for the man they're looking for. The capture came in Puerto Rico in a suburb of San Juan. It's a suburb known as Santurce. And this afternoon at a news conference held here, authorities gave the details.
The break in the case came last night when New York City detectives developed information that Castillo was hiding out in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico. The FBI was contacted and they developed information that led to Castillo's arrest today.
That welcome announcement follows a massive 9-day manhunt. Hundreds of New York City police officers and 70 FBI agents searched for the killer of Christopher Hoban. Hoban was a 4-year veteran of the force. The 26-year-old was shot on October 18th during a buy and bust operation in Upper Manhattan. He managed to shoot and kill one of 3 suspects. Another was apprehended that night. But 24-year-old Benvenido Castillo got away. Police say when 3 FBI agents spotted him this afternoon, he ran and put up a short struggle. He's expected to be arraigned this afternoon.
If Castillo waives extradition, he could be back in New York City as early as tomorrow. If he fights extradition, it could take 10 days to 2 weeks before he's back here.
Benvenido means welcome, so my comment is welcome home, Benvenido, back to New York.
Back to New York, a big welcome from Mayor Koch, and a welcome, too, from the police. I've just been inside police headquarters, and they are going to welcome Benvenido home, as will everyone who would like to see him get his legal due. Another big welcome from a person who called CopShot with a tip that led to the arrest of Castillo. This person called CopShot, and as you may know, CopShot offers a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of a person involved in a cop shooting. There's a very happy person in the New York City area tonight. Of course, we may never know just how happy, because as with everyone who calls CopShot, his or her identity will never be revealed. We're live at One Police Headquarters. I'm Kathy Wolf, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
For more on this story, we're going now to Johanna Rosalie, who's a reporter for our affiliate in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And Johanna, I should say, can you tell me more about the circumstances of the arrest and what's going on now in the story?
Well, the special agent in charge of FBI in San Juan, Hoban, announced this afternoon the arrest of Dominican national Benvenido Castillo, wanted in New York City, as you know, for the killing of police officer Christopher Hoban. Castillo is 24 years old and was arrested at 1:15 this afternoon following a chase by FBI agents through a shopping mall in the area of Santurce, which is not a suburb, but right in the middle of the city of San Juan. And this is according to FBI New York Police Chief James Fox. Castillo was brought into the San Juan Federal Court at approximately 4:45 this afternoon. At this time, it is not known when Benvenido Castillo will be sent back to New York to face charges of first-degree murder for the death of undercover agent Hoban. And that's the information we have now.
Thank you, Johanna Rosalie in Puerto Rico. As you can tell, obviously, we had a little problem with the sound. Once again, Benvenido Castillo, suspected of having shot Officer Christopher Hoban on Tuesday night last week, has been arrested. He's in Puerto Rico, and now the job is to get him back here. John?
For the grieving parents of slain Officer Hoban.
News at 7.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Maury Povich. The third man wanted in the murder of an undercover narcotics cop, Christopher Hoban, is behind bars tonight. The one thought to have been the trigger man, and the long arm of the law caught up with him hundreds of miles from here. Pablo Guzman reports.
For 9 days, New York City police have been on the hunt for Benvenido Castillo, wanted for the killing of Officer Christopher Hoban. Community leaders put up a $10,000 reward through the CopShot organization, and federal agents assisted in the search. Finally, police and the FBI announced that this afternoon, Castillo's flight had come to an end in Santurce, Puerto Rico, a suburb of San Juan.
During this case's duration, over 70 FBI agents have been utilized, and literally hundreds of New York City police officers have been used.
This arrest is the final arrest in the homicide of police officer Christopher Hoban last Tuesday night.
Police believe Castillo left New York by train and got to Puerto Rico Friday on a flight from Florida. He was broke. Sources told Channel 5 News Castillo may have paid his way by hawking some jewelry. As police suspected, he was wounded on the left side, probably from the shootout with Hoban and his partner on the 18th. When the FBI apprehended him, Castillo tried to run, but was caught.
Was he staying with anybody in Puerto Rico?
Yes, he was with some people that we're not going to identify those people.
If Castillo waives extradition, he could be brought back to New York tomorrow. But if he chooses to fight, it might take 10 days to 2 weeks. From outside police headquarters, I'm Pablo Guzman, Fox News, Channel 5.
Officer Hoban's parents are standing by now at their home in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Martin and Tina Hoban, nice to have you both with us. Does this arrest, Mr. and Mrs. Hoban, I know with you bearing up enough with your grief, does it give you any consolation?
Oh, well, yes, it does give us consolation. We're brokenhearted over Chris's death, but we are jubilant that they have been caught. We're so happy about that, but we knew that that the police department would eventually catch him with the other law enforcement agencies. We can't thank them enough, and we're very happy that they caught him.
Mr. Hoban, any regrets now about your son and his joining the department?
No regrets at all. He was a gentle person, but he was a brave person. I'm sorry he had to die, but I know his death will not have been in vain. I am sure that something is going to come of this. We're praying that the Lord will be changed.
I know there are lots of letters in front of you that we caught glimpses of. What are those letters like?
Oh, we have received over 18,000 letters from people, some people we do not even know. New York City, this has touched the city, and they have opened up their hearts and written to us. These are letters from the 6th grade in OLPH, other letters from the students in my school at St. Joseph High School, friends, relatives, and strangers.
So much, Mr. and Mrs. Hoban. I know in your grief. Thank you so much for talking with us.
You're welcome.
Very kind of them to join us tonight. And in other news, 2 convicts serving time for murder at the new Northern State Prison in
Hoban. Those trapped whales near Alaska are free if they can get out of the slush. Mike Tyson's IOU to Donald Trump, and E.T. comes home to video stores throughout the area.
This is the Independent News with Brad Holbrook and Donna Hanover.
Good evening. For 9 tension-filled days and nights, he was at the top of the list of New York City's most wanted criminals.
Tonight, the suspected triggerman in the murder of undercover police officer Christopher Hoban is behind bars in Puerto Rico after his dramatic capture in a suburb of San Juan this afternoon. As Eric Shawn reports, the arrest came suddenly.
He was the target of a massive manhunt. Cops wanted him bad. Benvenido Castillo, also known as Daniel. Since Tuesday night, a week ago, he was hunted in the killing of undercover police officer Christopher Hoban, who police think Castillo shot with a .357 Magnum as the young officer was making an official drug buy in a suspected crack house on West 105th Street. This afternoon, the dragnet paid off in Puerto Rico. At 1:15, while walking through a shopping mall in the San Juan suburb of Santurce, Castillo was nabbed by FBI agents staking out the mall on a tip.
The break in the case came last night when New York City detectives developed information that Castillo was hiding out in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico.
He resisted and attempted to flee on foot. That's when the 3 FBI agents subdued him and handcuffed him and took him to the FBI office in San Juan. He seemed very surprised and very chagrined.
Police chased Castillo that night, and even though he got away, they say detectives were close on his tail ever since. It is believed he fled the city just last Friday, taking a train to Florida and then a plane to Puerto Rico. As believed, he was wounded in the shootout. Castillo has a bullet hole in his left side, but no slug. Authorities will not reveal in whose house he was staying in Puerto Rico or who turned him in.
Is there any evidence to support that who possibly may have helped him financially or helped him flee from New York?
We don't have that much detail at this point.
Is there any connection, do you think, to higher-ups in the drug sector?
No indication of that at this point.
Police have already arrested Flavio Profetti in this case, and another suspect, Manuel De La Rosa, was shot dead in his chair by Hoban that night. Just hours later, another officer, Michael Busek, was tragically killed on West 161st Street. 2 suspects have already been arrested in his killing.
Benvenido means welcome, so my comment is welcome home, Benvenido, back to New York.
If Castillo, who is a native of the Dominican Republic, waives extradition, he could be back in New York as early as tomorrow. If not, his return could take longer. But tonight, officials are clearly pleased and gratified that the last suspect has now been nabbed in what was one of the most painful nights of violence against the police of our city. Donna? Thank you, Eric.
City to his death. Hundreds took part in the Edward R. Byrne Memorial Walk on Drugs, which ends Drug-Free New York Week. They were led by Officer Byrne's parents and the parents of Christopher Hoban, one of the latest officers to die in the drug war. The 6-mile trek went from Long Island City to the Queensboro Bridge and back. Money donated for each mile covered goes to the event sponsor, a drug and alcohol treatment agency called Outreach Project. You'll recall that Officer Byrne was murdered in Queens last summer while guarding a drug witness.
And still ahead, as Linda has noted, we're moving closer.
In separate incidents One was 26-year-old Christopher Hoban, who was gunned down on the Upper West Side during a drug arrest. Today, opening arguments began in the trial of the men accused of that crime. And News 4's John Miller reports.
In his opening statement to the jury, the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Armand Durasante, said that Officer Chris Hoban and his partner, Officer Germain, were buying cocaine undercover. He said that night a year ago, the drug dealers thought the two might be cops, and during a search at gunpoint, one of the drug dealers allegedly found Officer Germain's police gun.
Castillo removed the gun from behind a clock, placed the gun to Officer Hoban's head. There was some conversation in which Officer Hoban and Officer Germain protested that they were not police. Officer Hoban attempted to convince these individuals that they were not police by lifting his shirt to show that he was not armed. Della Rosa, seeing that, went to Officer Germain, found Officer Germain's gun, lifted it out, shouted police.
A struggle ensued just after that. Shots were fired, and when it was over, Hoban was dead. So was one of the suspects. The prosecutor says Officer Germain was attacked by another suspect, Flavio Profet, who struggled with him as Hoban was being shot and killed in the next room. Bienvenido Castillo is charged with being the actual gunman. Today in court, his lawyer said nothing. But Profet's lawyer, Fred Seligman, said his client was just a man who rented his apartment to drug dealers for $3,000. And when he stopped by to walk his dog, he got caught in the middle of a drug deal gone bad. The prosecution's case concerns a young hero cop gunned down. The defense tactic seems to be, so far, to paint a different picture of two young, inexperienced undercover officers who panicked in the middle of a drug buy, and in doing so may have cost one of their own lives. But that'll be a very tough defense to sell to a jury, especially in a city where the #1 concern among citizens, according to most polls, is drug crime. John Miller, News 4, Manhattan.
The last of the major WedTech trials.
Today, the three men accused of his murder were in court for opening arguments. Benvenito Castillo is the alleged triggerman. He fled to Puerto Rico after the killing, where he was later arrested and extradited to the U.S. The prosecution described how the bust went sour when Castillo grew suspicious and frisked the officers looking for weapons.
Well, the two candidates. The high publicity surrounding the tragedy, and then the trial, which can come a month or years later. These factors combine to keep the painful memories alive. New York City police officer Chris Hoban died a year ago. Today, Sarah Wallace talked with his family, and they sadly admitted that time does not heal all wounds. Sarah.
Roz, you know, when a cop is killed, it is so very public. We've certainly all seen the headlines for the past couple of days about the detectives murdered on the Grand Central Parkway. Every gruesome detail described. Then there is the very public funeral of a cop and the very public trial of those accused of that murder. Every day for the past 5 weeks, Christopher Hoban's family has walked into Manhattan Criminal Court, where 3 alleged drug dealers are on trial for allegedly killing the 26-year-old undercover cop during a buy-and-bust deal on the Upper West Side last year. Hoban was shot because his cover was blown. He refused to test the drugs he was buying. So are you angry about the fact that you got to go through it?
No, I'm not angry about that fact. I'm sad that we have to go through it.
Do you ever think there's going to be a time where it gets better?
I don't know. Maybe when we look at our first grandchild, we'll feel that. And when you see those headlines, you feel another member of your family has been killed.
You go to all these funerals for other officers. Why?
We have to go to support these parents and mates, these
Even though
wives.
it's hard for you to be there?
It is hard, but it's something we have to do.
Maybe a bond of grief will be knitted and we'll be able to see each other through.
This funeral just yesterday for Officer Gary Coe, stabbed to death last weekend.
So when I went to the wake the other night for Officer Coe, I kind of touched him and asked him to say hello to Chris. That was very sad.
And in spite of the danger, Chris's younger brother will soon join the Brotherhood of Blue. He's passed the police exam.
I want to carry on his name Yes, I do want to do that. I'd like to get his shield number, you know.
But you just want to make a difference instead?
It's impossible to make a difference in the city, Sarah, but you just want to do your part.
Tomorrow, for the second time this week, the Hobans will take a day off from court to attend a second police funeral, that of Detective Richard Gerzon. And on Saturday, there will be yet another for Detective Keith Williams. Roz, Greg.
Hopefully the healing can start soon. Sarah, thanks. The defense in the Central Park jogger attack case gets charged with the execution-style slaying of an undercover police officer. 2 co-defendants were tried for lesser charges. It started with a drug buy last year during a narcotics sting, but the buy went bad and the cop was shot to death. Police claim Castillo is the trigger man. But as Sarah Wallace reports live from the Supreme Court in Lower Manhattan, that decision is now in the hands of the jury. Sarah?
And Greg, the jury has been deliberating here since this morning when they got this case. About a half an hour ago, in an upstairs courtroom behind me on the 9th floor, Christopher Hoban's mother sobbed quietly as she listened to a readback of testimony from the medical examiner who described how a bullet had shattered Chris's skull. 2 of the men on trial here are accused of robbery, kidnapping, and murder. A third defendant, a third man, is charged with helping the alleged trigger man escape. Chris Hoban died over a gram of cocaine. In October of last year, the undercover cop and his partner were involved in a buy-and-bust operation in an apartment on West 105th Street in Upper Manhattan. The deal went bad. This man, Bienvenido Castillo, who apparently suspected Hoban was a cop, allegedly shot the officer in the head and the side, while another accused dealer, Flavio Perfetti, held the officer from behind. Perfetti was arrested outside the apartment building. Castillo fled to Puerto Rico, where he was arrested by the FBI a week later. Manuel Pineda Oganda is charged in this case with helping Castillo escape. Chris's friends and his family, including his parents and 2 younger brothers, have kept a constant vigil at the courthouse during the 2-month trial. And today, as his family marked the close of the trial, earlier they viewed for the first time in stone the final inscription on Chris's grave.
It's beautiful. It's very nice. And it had my favorite saying on, which was, "He is the wind beneath our wings." And he is. Our 3 sons really are. The pain will always be with you. As I say, every night you look and there's an empty chair at the table. It's a constant reminder. And well, that's the way you want it to be, too.
My brother's in a better place than all of us right now.
You really believe that?
I believe that, yeah.
Right now, the jury continues to deliberate. The evidence, by the way, is so overwhelming against Castillo, you might have thought that the jury would come in very quickly, but as we know, juries are pretty unpredictable, and this one is certainly no exception. The judge will probably keep the jury here till about 8 o'clock tonight, and if there's no verdict, of course, they'll be back again tomorrow. We're live from Lower Manhattan. Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
And in Jersey City this evening,
Bienvenido Castillo is accused of shooting Hoban in the head while accused drug dealer Flavio Profeta held Hoban down. Hoban's murder happened during a buy-and-bust operation in Upper Manhattan back in October of 1988. After the killing, Castillo fled to Puerto Rico, but he was arrested a week later by the FBI. Manuel Oganda is charged with helping Castillo to escape. There was
The accused gunman was convicted, along with a man who helped him get away. Another defendant was cleared. Bob O'Brien is at Manhattan Criminal Court with more. Bob?
Cora, and after a month and a half of testimony, it took a jury of 7 men and 5 women less than 2 days of deliberations to reach their selective and split verdict in the trial of 3 men charged with the murder of undercover narcotics officer Christopher Hoban. Bienvenido Castillo, the man who pulled the trigger, fatally wounding Officer Christopher Hoban, was charged with 13 counts, ranging from murder to kidnapping and drug sales. The jury's finding was the same for all 13 counts, guilty. Castillo, a former police officer in the Dominican Republic until he was kicked off the force after murdering 2 civilians, will be sentenced January 8th. He faces 40 years to life behind bars. Martin Hoban, the father of Officer Christopher Hoban, is not satisfied with that penalty and directed his response to Governor Cuomo.
This man deliberately shot my son in the stomach and in the head, and now a coward, a filthy coward like Cuomo, we can put him in the electric chair.
Flavio Profeta faced 5 counts, including murder. The killing happened in an apartment Profeta sublet to drug dealers, but the jury cut him a different fate from his co-defendants.
to charge 2, count 1, murder in the second degree, felony murder, robbery. How say you? Charge 3, count 4, kidnapping in the second degree.
Profet was acquitted on all charges and set free. The third defendant, Manuel Pineda Oganda, faced 2 charges of hindering police in their efforts to find Castillo, who escaped after he killed Officer Hoban. The jury convicted Pineda only of a misdemeanor, hindering prosecution. Chris Hoban's mother is relieved that it is finally over.
Now we think that Chris will rest in peace. His headstone was finished yesterday and inscribed on it as, "He is the wind beneath our wings." We're going to put it on this weekend, and we know he'll rest in peace.
Officer Hoban's father says that most Americans simply don't understand that World War III has been underway for some years now. It is the war against drugs, the battlefield, our very homeland. And Martin Hoban says, unless the forces of law and order quickly escalate their tactics, it is a war that is most certain to be lost. From Manhattan Criminal Court, Bob O'Brien, Fox News, Channel 5. Coran, back to you.
Cops ever had. October 18th, 1988. 2 officers gunned down in separate incidents fighting the war on drugs. Today, justice was done in one of the cases. Chris O'Donoghue is here with the story.
On that night last year, Chris Hoban was on a routine buy and bust. He refused to take a sample sniff of cocaine. In return, he took 2 shots to the forehead and the chest. It took the jury 2 days to reach a verdict, 2 days to decide if a former member of the National Police in the Dominican Republic was guilty of the crime.
How say you to charge 1, count 1, murder in the first degree?
Guilty to that charge. The jury came in with 13 guilty verdicts against Benvenido Castillo. Guilty on all charges. Guilty of murdering 26-year-old officer Chris Hoban in an apartment on West 105th Street last year. One co-defendant, Flavio Profetti, broke into tears and hugged his lawyer as the jury acquitted him on all charges. After hearing the verdict, Officer Hoban's family also broke into tears, then tried to find words for their feelings.
We've waited 13 and a half months for justice. Not vengeance, but justice. And we feel that justice has been carried out.
Chris Hoban's father can't understand why his son is dead, but the killer only faces life.
The first thought that I had was that Governor Cuomo should now reinstitute the death penalty in New York State. And if he doesn't do it, he is a coward.
And Chris Hoban's 2 brothers say their brother's death hasn't changed their minds. They still want to be cops themselves.
It didn't change my thoughts at all about being cops. Like I said, I had faith in the judicial system.
I still want to do it. Still want to do it more than ever now.
Now we think that Chris will rest in peace. His headstone was finished yesterday and inscribed on it as, "He is the wind beneath our wings."
A third defendant, also a former cop in the Dominican Republic, was found guilty of helping Castillo escape. Castillo, by the way, was kicked off the Dominican National Police Force for involvement in a killing there. He'll be sentenced January the 8th. Roland.
Okay, thank you.
Hoban was shot when a drug buy and bust operation went bad. Sarah Wallace is outside State Supreme Court in Lower Manhattan with the story. Sarah.
Well, Roz, this has been a very long ordeal for Christopher Hoban's family. Tonight, there is some relief for that family. Within the hour, a jury here in Lower Manhattan found the suspected triggerman, Bienvenido Castillo, guilty of 13 counts, guilty across the board of charges ranging from murder to kidnap to robbery in Chris Hoban's death. A second defendant was convicted of helping Castillo escape, but the jury acquitted a third man of being an accomplice to the murder.
Mr. Foreman, members of the jury, you say through your foreman you find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, guilty of murder in the second degree, guilty of robbery in the first degree.
As the clerk read off the jury's verdict on the 13 counts against Bienvenido Castillo, a translator repeated the words for the 24-year-old defendant in Spanish, and the muffled sobs of relief of Christopher Hoban's family could be heard in the courtroom. The prosecution contended that Castillo had shot and killed Christopher Hoban over a gram of cocaine, while the undercover cop and his partner were making a buy in what they thought would be a routine buy-and-bust drug operation. It happened in a drug-ridden apartment building in Upper Manhattan in October of 1988. Witnesses say Castillo got suspicious when Hoban refused to sample cocaine and pulled out a gun. There was a struggle. When it was over, the young cop lay fatally wounded, his skull shattered.
49-year-old Flavio Profeta, another alleged dealer, had been accused of being an accomplice and faced similar charges of murder, robbery, and kidnapping. But he had claimed he tried to run when the shooting started. Apparently, the jury believed him. A third defendant, Manuel Pineda Oganda, was convicted of one count of hindering the prosecution, helping Castillo escape after the murder. Outside, the reaction from Hoban's family.
We've waited 13 and a half months for justice. Not vengeance, but justice. And we feel that justice has been carried out as far as Castillo goes.
The family tonight tells me they will be back in court for the sentencing of Bienvenido Castillo in January. And by that time, Chris Hoban's two younger brothers may be on the police force. They want to follow in their brother's footsteps, and they have both passed the police exam. We're live from Lower Manhattan. Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
More tragic news tonight. Another woman has been found.
Over last year, a violent night, a very violent night in New York City. 2 police officers were killed, and one of them was Christopher Hoban. Bienvenido Castillo stood trial for the murder of Officer Hoban, and the jury has returned the verdict, guilty on all counts. Sarah Wallace reports.
For Christopher Hoban's family, an ordeal which began 13 months ago ended tonight.
His headstone will be put up now. Everything will be done. Chris will finally rest in peace.
Just moments earlier, the family sobbed quietly as Bienvenido Castillo, the accused killer of the undercover cop, was convicted of 13 criminal counts, ranging from kidnap and robbery to murder.
Mr. Foreman, members of the jury, you say through your foreman you find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, guilty of murder in the second degree, guilty of robbery in the first degree.
Prosecutors say Castillo, a drug dealer, shot Hoban in the side and then at point-blank range in the head during a buy-and-bust operation that went bad in an Upper Manhattan apartment.
We've waited 13 and a half months for justice. Not vengeance, but justice. And we feel that justice has been carried out as far as Castillo goes.
Governor Cuomo should now reinstitute the death penalty in New York State. And if he doesn't do it, he is a coward.
Castillo will be back here for sentencing next month. By that time, Chris's 2 younger brothers may be in the police academy. They have both passed the police exam. As one of them told me, I want to do it more than ever now. I want to do it for Chris. From Manhattan Criminal Court, Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
An officer knows the dangers faced on every patrol, every assignment. That's why October 18th of last year sticks out. 2 officers shot to death hours apart and not far from each other on the city's west side. In one case, the man who did it put on women's clothing to run back to his home in the Dominican Republic. But it did not work. He had to face a jury's verdict. Bob O'Brien reports.
After a month and a half of testimony, it took a jury of 7 men and 5 women less than 2 days of deliberations to reach their selective and split verdict in the trial of 3 men accused in the murder of undercover narcotics officer Christopher Hoban. Bienvenido Castillo, the man who pulled the trigger, fatally wounding Officer Christopher Hoban, was charged with 13 counts, ranging from murder to kidnapping and drug sales. The jury's finding was the same for all 13 counts, guilty. Castillo, a former police officer in the Dominican Republic until he was kicked off the force after murdering 2 civilians, will be sentenced January 8th. He faces 40 years to life behind bars. Martin Hoban, the father of Officer Christopher Hoban, is not satisfied with that penalty and directed his response to Governor Cuomo.
This man deliberately shot my son in the stomach and in the head, and now a coward, a filthy coward like Cuomo, we can't put him in the electric chair.
Flavio Profeta faced 5 counts, including murder. The killing happened in an apartment Profeta sublet to drug dealers, but the jury cut him a different fate from his co-defendants.
To charge 2, count 1, murder in the second degree, felony murder, robbery. How say you? Charge 3, count 4, kidnapping in the second degree.
Profeta was acquitted on all charges and set free. The third defendant, Manuel Pineda Oganda, faced 2 charges of hindering police in their efforts to find Castillo, who escaped after he killed Officer Hoban. The jury convicted Pineda only of a misdemeanor. Officer Hoban's 2 brothers, Thomas and Martin, are both awaiting acceptance into the police academy to follow in their brother's footsteps. Chris Hoban's mother is relieved that it is finally over.
Now we think that Chris will rest in peace. His headstone was finished yesterday and inscribed on it as, "He is the wind beneath our wings." We're going to put it on this weekend, and we know he'll rest in peace.
Officer Hoban's father says most Americans simply do not realize that World War III has been underway for some years now. It is the war on drugs, the battlefield, our very homeland. And Martin Hoban Sr. says, unless the forces of law and order escalate their tactics quickly, it is a war that is most certain to be lost. From Manhattan Criminal Court, Bob O'Brien, Fox News, Channel 5.
Verdict is in tonight in the murder trial of the man accused of killing undercover New York City police officer Christopher Hoban. 25-year-old Bienvenido Castillo, a former police officer in the Dominican Republic, was convicted of first and second-degree murder. Officer Hoban was gunned down in October 1988 when a $50 buy-and-bust drug deal in Upper Manhattan went bad. Castillo could get life in prison when he's sentenced January 8th. And on Long Island...
About 2.5 weeks ago, a horrible crime was committed in our city. 2 police officers murdered, killed in their car, taking a prisoner back to jail. Now, that kind of crime is more than just against the police. It's against our society. Police officers, remember, represent the decent part of society against those trying to rip it apart. They're soldiers in a war against crime that's going on in our streets, and they are dying for us in that war and leaving widows, too many of them. The cops who were killed this month left widows and families on that terrible day, a sad reminder of the past. We had another horrendous day in the city last year when 2 policemen were gunned down within hours of each other. Officer Christopher Hoban and Officer Michael Busick, both young men who left behind families. Michael Busick left behind a widow just 24 years old. She had to go on living and remembering. You and I have the luxury of wiping those killings out of our minds. Michael Busick's widow doesn't. And there are all kinds of reminders. Some are incredibly insensitive. One widow, for example, got the bill for the tolls of the long funeral procession across the George Washington Bridge. And of course, the bills for their husbands' funerals. But that has changed thanks to Survivors of the Shield, a remarkable group of women, the widows of policemen who died for you and me in the line of duty. Christine Busick will never forget the day her husband was killed, and neither will Mary Beth Rotolo, an officer's widow who was one of the founders of Survivors of the Shield.
What happens now is that the police department, they're wonderful. They're there for you. They set up the funeral. They make miracles happen those first few days, and you need that because you're not functioning. But then afterwards, they go back to their jobs, which is what they're supposed to do. You're not left totally alone by them, but they start to come less and less. And I think at that time, it's when we're supposed to come and be there and give the support. Last year, a police officer was killed in October, and his wife needed someone to talk to. And the police department got in touch with me and asked me if I would go.
I remember her walking through the door, and I just looked at her, and I'd never seen this woman before in my life, but we just looked at each other and both just broke down crying, and she just hugged me. And right from then, I knew I wasn't alone. She gave me a lot of guidance. I mean, the night she came, I was supposed to go to a personal viewing at the wake, and I didn't want to go. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have gone. And I went, and it was the right thing to do.
Mrs. William Gunn didn't go to a wake for her husband. He wasn't killed when he was shot in the head back in January. He has been in a coma ever since, and the doctors don't expect him to come out of it. Machines keep him alive. She has a 2.5-year-old girl. She was a little mouse this past Halloween, and Lori Gunn still hasn't told her about her father yet.
She asks for him all the time. And you know, right now it's easy because I could give her simple answers to appease her. I'm a little nervous about the future because I can't tell her that her daddy's coming home.
Do you think anyone understands what you're going through who isn't a policeman's wife?
Everybody could sympathize with me. Everybody has a heavy heart for me. And when they ask how I am, I say fine, but I'm not fine. And no one really knows how I am, except for people like the members of Survivors of the Shield.
And what about the sacrifice these men have made for you and me? A sacrifice you and I can forget, but one their families remember forever. Do we really appreciate and understand that police officers are giving their lives for us?
I think people should appreciate them a lot more and understand that they really are putting their lives on the line every single day. They're going to war, not to work. They're going to war, not to work. They're going to war, not to work. They're going to war, not to work.
Thank goodness for this organization.
They're doing a terrific job. Remarkable bunch of ladies.
All right, Nick is coming up with the weather. There's more snow in the world to have their lives back the way they were. That's because they got to this point by losing their world. This is a police officer's funeral, Officer Thomas Rotolo. He was 30 years old when he was killed by a robber back in 1984. Like millions of other New Yorkers, when you saw his funeral on the news on television, you felt bad for him and his family, shook your head, muttered something about the crime in New York, and then turned your thoughts to something else. Right now, I want you to turn your thoughts to that police officer's widow, Mary Beth. She didn't have the luxury of forgetting. She does have the pain of remembering constantly, but she has turned the emptiness of grief into a fulfilling challenge to bring together other widows to help themselves deal with their loss. The organization is called Survivors of the Shield, and they have made a difference. Did you know that when police officers were killed in the line of duty, their families were billed for their funerals? Not anymore. Survivors of the Shield had that law changed. Did you know widows lost their husband's pension when they remarried? Not anymore. SOS had that changed too. And on top of tangling with the politicians, Survivors of the Shield works to untangle the knot of grief that can strangle a widow to the point of desperation. Mary Beth's husband was killed on Valentine's Day. She was only 27 years old, married 5 years. How in the world does a woman handle something like that?
I don't know. You know, you're really blown away at the time. You don't know how to react. There is no proper way to react. I felt that I was totally blown up, and pieces of me were everywhere, and it's a very gradual thing. You start to pull yourself together, piece by piece. But one thing that you realize, or that I've realized, is that those pieces don't go back in the same places. You're never what you were before. You have to have lived through something like that to understand that. That's why the organization is so important. That's why when we come together, you know, we can talk about anything because we've all lived through and shared one of the most tragic things that can ever happen to a person. And we all gain from one another. You know, women come with stories of, you know, their children, how their children are acting. And there might be a woman who'd been widowed a little bit longer, whose child went through the same thing, and she jumps in and says, whoa, wait a minute, you know, do this works. So we really do learn from one another. And yeah, we do cry, you know, but we laugh too. And it works. Survivors of the Shield works.
And it doesn't always work in an intimate way. Sometimes at meetings like this, they'll bring in an outside expert, an expert in their field. On this particular occasion, an expert in helping them deal with their children and explaining, if such a thing is really possible, what happened to Daddy.
So what it's important is to be able to be in a position where you can really talk about the anger, let your kids be angry, and understand that anger is going to come up. It's going to come up again and again and again and again.
What would you say to somebody who's watching right now who might be engaged to a police officer, might be thinking about marrying a police officer? What would you say to that woman?
Don't marry him thinking, or her thinking, that it will never happen. It could happen to you. One of the things I remember saying to someone as I stood at Tommy's wake was, I had 5 years of paradise, and that's more than some people ever have.
In fact, we also had Officer Thomas Rotolo for 5 years. He died for you and me, too. We shouldn't forget that.
Live in New York.
filled with police officers. Last month of murdering New York police officer Christopher Hoban one bloody night back in October 1988. It was a drug killing, a buy-and-bust operation gone wrong. For Castillo, this was a day of reckoning, sentencing for the murder of Chris Hoban. He's been given 57 years to life. Sarah Wallace has more on the story.
For the family of Christopher Hoban, their trip to Manhattan Criminal Court today was the last chapter in a painful drama that began in October of 1988. On that night, 26-year-old Chris was shot dead in an Upper Manhattan apartment during a buy-and-bust drug deal. This is the man who pulled the trigger, 25-year-old Bienvenido Castillo, a one-time cop in the Dominican Republic who came to this country after he was accused of a murder in his homeland. Today, 150 fellow police officers packed a 9th-floor courtroom to overflowing, seeking justice for Castillo. They got it.
It is clear, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the defendant violently and unlawfully acted deliberately against a police officer.
Judge Atlas gave Castillo the maximum term for murder, 25 years to life, and the maximum for the 12 other counts on the indictment.
The minimum terms that I have imposed, which I believe constitute the minimum sentence in this case, total 57 years and 2 months.
Please. The courtroom erupted in response.
We hope that this will be a nice guideline and a warning to everyone out there that you just can't go around shooting people indiscriminately.
But if you really wanted to have justice, it should have been a death penalty.
And although Mr. and Mrs. Hoban both admit to mixed emotions, each of the two younger sons, Martin and Tommy, plan on following in Chris's footsteps. They have each passed the police exam. From Lower Manhattan, Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Tonight in Ridgefield, New Jersey.
They cheered when Justice Jeffrey Atlas said Bienvenido Castillo will have to serve 57 years and 2 months before being eligible for parole. Castillo shot Hoban last October when the officer refused to sniff cocaine during a buy-and-bust operation. A police officer in Ridgefield, New Jersey, thought he was about to help someone stuck on the highway. Instead,
in Long Island last year. The abortion was performed February 11th on Miss Klein, who was in a coma at the time. Doctors had agreed the abortion could improve her chances of recovery from a serious car accident. But first, her husband had to go to the Supreme Court to defeat abortion opponents who sought to block the operation. Well, tonight the word is that Nancy Klein has indeed come out of the coma and is able to talk and is even regaining her memory.
A Ridgefield, New Jersey police officer is alive tonight because he was wearing his life-saving bulletproof vest. Tonight, officials released this sketch of the woman they believed fired 3 times at Officer Vincent Aiello when he stopped to investigate what he thought was a disabled vehicle. Doug Johnson has more.
Ridgefield, New Jersey police officer Vincent Aiello is said to be in good condition this evening as he lies in a Hackensack hospital with a brutal bruise on his chest. Early this morning, Aiello spotted what he thought was a disabled car at this gas station on Route 46, 3 miles from the George Washington Bridge. A man was under the car. It is believed he was trying to remove a bag of drugs hidden there. Crack vials were found on the ground. Suddenly, a woman jumped from the car and fired 3 times at point-blank range. 1 bullet struck Aiello below the heart. His life was saved because he was wearing a bulletproof vest. As an artist prepared a composite drawing of the suspect, Aiello described his ordeal.
It's horrifying, especially when you don't expect it. If it was something where you're going onto a call when you're a holdup, it's a different story. You're going to be prepared for something like that, but this was totally hard to take. I thought she was going to kill me. I just thought she was going to kill me.
The Ridgefield police chief says all his men are required to wear bulletproof vests on duty. However, he is outraged at the violence of the drug dealers.
We have them shooting at armed, trained police officers. Where does that put the general public in this equation? It's frightening.
Violent incidents like this are becoming more and more common in these quiet suburban communities. Only last May, this same police officer attempted to stop a suspicious vehicle. A man popped out of the trunk and began firing at him. In this case, all of the bullets hit the police car. Vincent Aiello says New Jersey is becoming a dangerous place.
It's just that the people don't realize we're the corridor for New York City for the drug route.
In Ridgefield, New Jersey, Doug Johnson, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Once again, the suspect is described as a Hispanic woman who police say wears 5 diamond earring studs in her left ear.
This was a day of reckoning for Bienvenido Castillo. Today, in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan, packed with 150 police officers, Judge Jeffrey Atlas sentenced Castillo to 57 years to life behind bars for the murder of undercover police officer Christopher Hoban in October '88. His father says Castillo should pay the ultimate price, however.
If you really wanted to have justice, it should have been a death penalty.
Hoban was murdered after he refused to snort cocaine during an Upper Manhattan buy and bust operation back in October of '88.
When we continue on Eyewitness News, a friendly bet between Mark Jackson and Charles Barkley turns into more than they bargained for.
Corey will have all the sports.
Officers, Greg.
A day of justice for Bienvenido Castillo, the drug dealer convicted of murdering undercover police officer Christopher Hoban. In a Lower Manhattan courtroom packed with 150 police officers, Judge Jeffrey Atlas sentenced Castillo to the maximum term.
By my reckoning, apart from the fact that the longest maximum sentence that I have imposed is obviously a life sentence, the minimum terms that I have imposed, which I believe constitute the minimum sentence in this case, total 57 years and 2 months. Please.
Hoban was killed in October of 1988 during a buy and bust operation on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. We'll have more on the sentencing tonight at 6. Veronica Prego.
Now, Eyewitness News.
Good evening. Bienvenido Castillo was found guilty last month of murdering New York police officer Christopher Hoban one bloody night back in October 1988. It was a drug killing, a buy and bust operation gone wrong. For Castillo, this was a day of reckoning, sentencing for the murder of Chris Hoban. He's been given 57 years to life. Sarah Wallace has more on the story.
For the family of Christopher Hoban, their trip to Manhattan Criminal Court today was the last chapter in a painful drama that began in October of 1988. On that night, 26-year-old Chris was shot dead in an Upper Manhattan apartment during a buy-and-bust drug deal. This is the man who pulled the trigger, 25-year-old Bienvenido Castillo, a one-time cop in the Dominican Republic who came to this country after he was accused of a murder in his homeland. Today, 150 fellow police officers packed a 9th floor courtroom to overflowing, seeking justice for Castillo. They got it.
It is clear, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the defendant violently and unlawfully acted deliberately against a police officer.
Judge Atlas gave Castillo the maximum term for murder, 25 years to life, and the maximum for the 12 other counts on the indictment.
The minimum terms that I have imposed, which I believe constitute the minimum sentence in this case, total 57 years and 2 months. Please.
The courtroom erupted in response.
We hope that this will be a nice guideline and a warning to everyone out there that you just can't go around shooting people indiscriminately.
But if you really wanted to have justice, it should have been a death penalty.
And although Mr. and Mrs. Hoban both admit to mixed emotions, each of the 2 younger sons, Martin and Tommy, plan on following in Chris's footsteps. They have each passed the police exam. From Lower Manhattan, Sarah Wallace, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Tonight in Ridgefield, New Jersey,
A convicted cop killer received his sentence today. Bienvenido Castillo sat quietly in the courtroom. He received 57 years to life. A jury said that he's the drug dealer who killed 26-year-old police officer Christopher Hoban back in October of 1988. A crowd of 150 police officers broke into applause after the sentence was announced. Castillo will not be eligible for parole until he is 82 years old. Well, meanwhile, tonight there's a cop at Ridgefield.